Welcome everyone to our newest webinar in our series called Logistics in Motion. And welcome everyone again. Great to have you here. And I'm thrilled to, let's move my slides. We have a little agenda for you today here that we always have: introductions, the latest news in supply chain, a closer look in the energy sector, and then our guest speakers will present as well and bring so much information in this field to all of us. So thank you everyone for being here. Also, we are live on our Facebook page, and also we're gonna have a questionnaire posted on the chat so you can give us feedback on this webinar, and hopefully we can improve it every time. So again, my name is Arnon Mello. I'm the founder and president for MELLOHAWK Logistics. We are a supply chain provider here in Canada with offices in the US and Brazil. And today I have with me Laura Neto from the Trade Commissioner Office, one of the offices in Brazil, in Rio. And our guest speaker today, Rodrigo Sauaia, Dr. Rodrigo Sauaia, that's going to talk about the solar energy, which is something so important nowadays. A little bit about MELLOHAWK and our history. We've been in business for 17 years. And we, as I mentioned, are a supply chain provider, and we move cargo by air, ocean, and trucking. And we also do customs clearances all over the world. Some of our services are warehousing, distribution, freight in general, and we do a lot of consulting, which means working with you, the manufacturer or the importer, on the product that you have, and the points of departure or entry, depending on the country you're selling or importing from, so to create a logistic solution for your product. Of course, Brazil is a niche market for us because I am Brazilian and we ship to Brazil on a daily basis. We understand both sides of customs issues, not only in Canada, but also in Brazil, which is very complex. So we also an approved supplier of the Canadian government in Brazil. So as the beginning of our webinars, I always try to bring the latest news, what's happening in the world today. That's why we started this webinar series. And somebody is to bring you up to date because of COVID-19. As you know, supply chain in the world has been disrupted and affected. So air freight is chaos still. Ocean freights are moving, but we have delays. So I like to bring you some news that we have this week and the past couple of days. And the first one is that sweeping new legislation passed Tuesday, June 30th, granting Beijing broad powers to crack down on a variety of crimes in Hong Kong. As you can imagine, this is going to have huge repercussions of the trade with China, and causing some countries to review their trade agreements with China because of this new development. Also, yesterday was Canada Day, so happy Canada Day to everyone. As you can see, I'm still celebrating Canada with the flag behind. And yesterday as well was the first day of the new Canada, US, Mexico trade agreement. We call it by the Canadian name, CUSMA. And it's a new version of the NAFTA, which most of you have heard, and it has some major changes in terms of the automobile industry, dairy and poultry, and also intellectual property protection. So there's a new form as well. So this just went into effect yesterday. So hopefully this will increase business between the three countries involved. In Canada, companies are returning to work, slowly returning to their normal activity here, with several new procedures of how to handle staff into an office. So it's going to affect this week. And the latest update is that Atlas Renewable Energy, a leading renewable energy company in Latin America, along with the American multinational company Dow Inc., announced in June, just now, the signing of a large-scale solar energy contract in Bahia. The clean energy supply will serve Dow needs under a 15-year duration contract. So this is really interesting and great news. And as you know, there is a lot of Canadian investment in Brazil in the solar business. So one of them, we can talk a little bit more later as well. Laura can complement what I'm talking about. This is Canadian Solar's 75 million investment in Salgueiro Solar Project in January 2019, and also Brookfield Energia Renovável, Brookfield Asset Management acquisition of Alto Sertão third wind power complex in February 2018. So I'm sure Laura can share more of those companies that have invested in Brazil. Another topic that I like to bring is that if you're shipping first of all, any kind of equipment to any part of the world, not only Brazil or South America, is that, first of all, look at your Incoterms. If you don't know what Incoterms are, is the transfer of risk and cost on a shipping transaction. So very important to have that on your contracts. Also, don't neglect packing, especially for solar panels. I mean, they're very delicate. Of course, you have to have proper packaging. Insurance also is the key. Always have insurance on your cargo because you don't know once it's in transit, anything can happen, right? And also limitation on weights that are carried by some companies, or the packaging itself can cause damage to the equipment. And dedicated trucking as well for delivery, because the more you handle something, it can get damaged, it can be dropped, especially something this delicate. And direct flights, of course, are always the best option. Nowadays, as you can imagine, very limited direct flights all over the world. So hopefully, as August comes along, Air Canada will start flying to Brazil, and that will solve a lot of issues. At the moment, a lot of flights to Brazil and from Brazil and South America are via Miami, and then from Miami trucked all over North America, because there's still limited capacity on planes from major points like New York or Houston or even Miami. So now I would like to introduce you to Laura Neto, who is the Trade Commissioner in one of the 6 offices in Brazil. And the reason we started this webinar series is also that we want to showcase the importance of the Trade Commissioner Office in Brazil and all over the world, because they have so much knowledge and they're here to work for you, the Canadian manufacturer who wants to penetrate a product everywhere. They have inside knowledge and stats in the country they are in specific areas. So Laura's expertise is energy, and I welcome her today to talk about the services of the Trade Commissioner Office in Brazil. Thank you, Laura, for being here. It's a pleasure having you on board.
Thank you, Arnold. Thank you, everyone. I'd like to start by thanking MELLOHAWK for coordinating this webinar, and also Rodrigo Sauaia, the CEO of the ABSOLAR, which is the local association of solar photovoltaic energy in Brazil. And thank you very much, Rodrigo, for accepting our invite. It's great to have you here. And I'll just explain a little bit about the Trade Commissioner Service. I'm a Trade Commissioner based in the Consulate General of Canada in Rio de Janeiro. I'm responsible for the energy sector, meaning energy except for oil and gas. So I deal with renewables, any type of generation, including hydro, thermal, nuclear, any type of generation, transmission, distribution, helping Canadian companies in Brazil. So what we try to do is to always be connected with the main players in the Brazilian market, and Rodrigo is one of them, right? To try to support the Canadian companies locally, right? The Trade Commissioner Service, for those who don't know, we are present in 160 cities around the world. Always we try to be in places where we have more connections with, like the Brazilian market is a key market for us, and where we have areas of opportunities for Canada, where Canada has a differential as well, right? And our services, we provide any type of support to Canadian companies, including information, but not only information. We have also funding available for small and medium and enterprise innovators, associations, communities that can allow you to look into a market which is difficult sometimes to assess. And we also have the key contacts in the Brazilian market or any market we explore. And our activities include trade missions, events, both in Canada and abroad. Recently, in October 2019, for example, we organized a trade mission in the power sector. We brought a group of Brazilian utilities to Canada. We had 13 people joining the mission, some of the largest utilities in Brazil. We went to Ontario and Quebec at the time to visit the main players, to meet the companies face to face. And these activities have been bringing good results, some contracts signed, and also pilots in the Brazilian market. In Brazil, we have, for you to have an idea, there are millions of reais every year is spent on R&D, which is a mandatory investment by the utilities in Brazil. So Canadian companies can also use this funding, which is available in Brazil to have pilots of their technologies in Brazil. The utilities are very open. If you have an innovative solution, for example, this resource can be used. And in terms of the offices we have in Brazil, we have 6 offices. 2 of them, they are consulate generals, the one in São Paulo and Rio. But we also have an embassy in Brasilia and 3 trade offices, one in Belo Horizonte in the southeast, one in the south of Brazil in Porto Alegre, and one in northeast in Recife. Okay, and in each of these offices, you can go to the next one, please. So just to mention here, some of the additional partners we have here in the local market. We have Export Development Canada. They can help with funding, with insurance, as Arnold mentioned. EDC can provide that as well. The EDC is also a governmental agency. In the case of Brazil, they are with us in the consulates, in the 2 consulates we have here in São Paulo and in Rio. We have representatives from EDC. And so if you need any support from them, they can also support. And if you're trying to offer a solution here to a Brazilian company, for example, and you are a client of EDC, they can also provide you with a marketing letter informing the company that they are eligible for financing from EDC. The government of Quebec is also at the Consulate General of São Paulo. And they do similar work and we usually work in partnership here. They are great to work with. And the Chamber of Commerce, Brazil, Canada, CCBC, we work very closely here in Brazil. Next, please. So in each of these offices that I mentioned before, we have managers focused on key areas of priority for Canada. We have oil and gas, life science, and also renewables, which is my case, but also some people focus on innovation agreements between Canada and Brazil, infrastructure, education, which is also a key sector. And every year we do our planning in around November, December, we prepare the annual plan for the fiscal year. And we organized activities, trade activities to put together the 2 countries. And this year we had many activities suspended, unfortunately, but in early next year, we already have a mission planned for SANDI, which is an annual energy distribution event. And in Brazil, it's the largest one in the distribution segment. And this is confirmed for March of next year. But we are also speaking to Rodrigo. Perhaps we can organize an activity focused on solar energy. And for InterSolar, which is the main event organized here in Brazil, which is led by the ABSOLAR. Okay. Next, please. So I'll leave my contact details there. As I said, I've been working here in Brazil now for almost 9 years at the Consulate of Canada. But before doing the same thing in the same sector now for almost 20 years, actually a little bit more than 20 years. So if you need any support in the local market, any type of support, information about regulation, taxes, or any support to meet the key contacts in the Brazilian market, I'm available. And with that, I would like to transfer to Rodrigo Sauaia, who is the CEO of ABSOLAR, which is the Brazilian Solar Photovoltaic Association. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura, so much for that introduction. And what people don't know is that there's so much resources that the trade commissioner offices have to help Canadian companies penetrate in any market, and people should take advantage of them.
Well, hello everyone. I guess now it's my turn. So first of all, I'd like to thank MELLOHAWK for the kind invitation to participate on this webinar with you today. Also thank Laura and all the team of the Consulate General of Canada, who are partners of ABSOLAR, especially the Trade Commissioner's Services. Well, I'm going to present to you a little bit about the work of our association and most especially the opportunities of the Brazilian PV market, also the challenges that we're facing, and an overview with the general numbers of the sector. So let's get started. Well, first about ABSOLAR, we are the national voice of the solar sector here in Brazil. So if you work with PV or you want to work with companies that are operating with PV in Brazil, get in touch with us. We'll be happy to have you on board as well. We work as the voice of the sector. We have information about market opportunities. We have discounts for relevant events such as Intersolar that Laura mentioned during her talk. And we also have working groups where we discuss the problems and the opportunities of the market. ABSOLAR has been founded in 2013, and we are an association that gathers companies from the whole value chain. So you can see here our members. The companies, by the way, that were cited here today are members of ABSOLAR, the Canadian companies that were cited. We have several companies from throughout the world. We have more than 600 members currently participating on this very interesting market of solar photovoltaics in Brazil. So I'll leave you my presentation. Also, you can then check our associate members later on. First of all, speaking about the Brazilian solar potential. The solar resource in Brazil is one of the best in the world. So if we quickly compare it, for example, with the average European solar irradiation, you can see that the solar potential, solar capacity can be around twice as high as the one in the United Kingdom, in Germany. It's also the case for Japan, for example, and I have to say Canada. So you can see that Brazil is a country with a lot of solar potential, and that's one of the reasons why this technology is becoming so popular in the country and so competitive as well. Apart of that, Brazil still has less than 2% of its electricity matrix provided by solar power. These are the large-scale power plants. And apart from these large-scale power plants, solar power plants, you can see that the majority of the electricity matrix in Brazil comes from hydropower. Similar to what's also happening in Canada, we have to say. So you can see that on average, renewables account for around 80% of the electricity generation in the country. So the country is already a renewable energy country. And changing from a fossil fuel electricity matrix is not a priority in Brazil because the electricity matrix is already green. One of the reasons why solar is such an interesting technology to the country, apart from its high potential, is because we need to reduce our dependency on the hydro reservoirs. Currently, we are depending a lot on hydropower, and this is difficult for the operation of the electricity matrix, especially during drought periods. Well, solar energy has been growing strongly in Brazil. I'll share with you some of the reasons of this very positive growth. We can see that the country became a gigawatt solar power market on 2017. And from then onward, each year forward, at least a gigawatt was installed. Actually, in 2019, we already had 2 gigawatts installed in a single year. And this year, we already had more than 1.2 gigawatts installed in the first 5 months of the year, despite the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic that happened. So this shows how this market is moving forward intensely. So you can see there are 2 market segments for solar in Brazil. The first one is large-scale power plants. This is the yellow market. These are power plants that are contracted by the government. But we also have through auctions, public auctions. But we also have the opportunity of direct bilateral PPAs between companies, between consumers and energy producers. And these are becoming more common for solar as well. These are also large-scale power plants. And then we have the second market segment, which is distributed generation. This is small-scale PV systems installed in rooftops, in facades, or in lands directly, generating electricity to end consumers. And this market does not depend on governmental policies or direct auctions. It happens by the interest of the population to reduce its electricity expenses and to also help develop a more sustainable future for Brazil. Talking about sustainable future, the market projections for the growth of solar are impressive in Brazil. As I mentioned, currently less than 2% of the electricity matrix in Brazil comes from solar. But you can see from the numbers of Bloomberg New Energy Finance, which is an economic consulting company, that expectations are that by 2050, solar power will be the #1 electricity source in Brazil with almost 40% of the total installed capacity. So this is a huge market opportunity for companies throughout the world and also in Canada who wants to do business in Brazil. Regarding the distributed generation market that I mentioned earlier, there are many different types of applications we can see on low-income housing, on public buildings, on commercial, industrial, residential, rural buildings, and even on floating systems on our solar carports or directly on the rooftops of buildings integrated into the roof, for example. But the main reason why this market is moving forward is a regulation that was developed by the Brazilian Electricity Regulatory Agency in 2012 called the Brazilian Net Metering Regulation. So this is a system that is actually using some of the best practices around globally with local net metering, virtual net metering, and community solar. So these are different ways people can generate their own electricity locally, use this electricity for their own consumption to reduce their costs, but also inject the excess electricity into the grid and gain a credit that they can use to compensate their future electricity use. This market has been booming in Brazil. It's not specifically for solar. Other technologies can also participate, such as hydro, wind, or biomass, but solar has definitely been the lion's share. 99.8% of all systems and 94% of the total installed capacity and investments come from solar. So solar is leading the way on small-scale systems generating electricity with renewable resources in Brazil. And here you can see who is actually the consumer who's using this type of electricity. So let's focus on the right part of the graph, where we can see here that commercial and service providers, these are small local companies such as bakeries, pharmacies, drugstores, small markets that are using this electricity to reduce their expenses. They are using this as an important way to become more competitive. You can also see the residential segment close by 38.7% as the second biggest users of solar power on small scale. And then we have the rural sector who recently jumped over industrial players using more electricity than the industrial companies. And then on the fourth place, industrial companies with 8.8%, and with a small percentage public buildings such as schools or hospitals using solar as well. But then there is a second market in Brazil that's for the large investors interested, and also the service providers and equipment providers, which is large scale power plants. So you can see here 4 different examples of real power plants that are already operational in Brazil in different regions of the country, northern part of the country and also the southeastern part of the country, where we have this kind of power plants operating in Brazil. Well, the development of this market is also very interesting. So let's focus here on this graph with several different numbers, which will stay for you to take a look later on, but focus on the red curve. Here, this red curve shows the prices of solar energy in dollars per megawatt hour. And you can see that from 2014, when the federal government made the first auction, solar auction in Brazil, up until now, prices have dropped to 1/4 of what they used to be. So that's how Brazil is becoming a big player in solar. Prices have dropped dramatically, and now solar is considered one of the most competitive electricity sources in the country. In fact, if we take a look at the 2 electricity auctions in 2019, these are the 2 last bars here in this graph, the 2 last columns here in this graph, you can see that solar, the yellow bar, was the lowest price offered in the auctions between all renewable energy sources. So this is really a great achievement for the technology. It was the most expensive renewable source by 2014, and well, last year became the cheapest one. So here's to our solar companies who are making this possible. There is another market segment that's important in Brazil and also a good opportunity for business, which is the value chain, fabricating components and equipment locally or bringing your components from countries such as Canada to Brazil to offer these components to the market. So here you can see some of the factories that are operational in the country already, producing modules, trackers, inverters, fixed racking structures, and other components. In Brazil, we have more than 100 manufacturers already doing this type of equipments, but the majority of them are doing just the assembling the components into a solar PV kit, which is this first bar with 112 manufacturers registered in the public bank BNDES. But you can see there are also inverter manufacturers, tracker manufacturers, and module manufacturers, as well as some other components, including local battery manufacturing that is already happening in Brazil for the future battery market that's coming. Well, this was everything that Brazil was doing until the pandemic came around. And then things had to shift, of course. So first, we have to talk about hard facts. Important to say that Brazil currently is the second country with the biggest number of cases in COVID-19. But rest assured, this is not something for the long term. The country will overcome, as it is already in some regions overcoming the pandemic. And we have seen the support and the opportunities coming forward in the solar sector after the pandemic comes around. But since the pandemic started, the first preoccupation that we had as a national association was to care for our market, our sector, and our associate members. So we developed a specific campaign called Solar Urgent, in Portuguese, Solar Urgente, to share tools and information, high quality information about what the government was doing to help alleviate the difficulties during the pandemics. This is available online in Portuguese if you want to check it in our communication channels. Feel free to take a look. Also, something important to know, the government was planning 2 renewable energy auctions this year, one on the first semester, one on the second semester, and because of the pandemic, these auctions are now postponed and still waiting for a new date to be released by the government. So we are following this very closely with the Ministry of Mines and Energy and are sharing the information firsthand with our associate members about these market opportunities. But apart from the pandemic, it's important to say that we are discussing with the government now how to take solar PV as a strategic tool to help bring the recovery and support the economic recovery of the country after the most difficult period of the pandemic. So we are definitely sure that solar PV can continue to attract billions in new investments from national and international players, as it has been doing even during the pandemic, as I showed you the numbers of installation for this year. Also, we believe that it's one of the best technologies to generate a lot of high quality jobs locally that can support people now who are looking for new business opportunities and new jobs. Also creating new companies with distributed generation, which already has more than 14,000 companies operational in the market, and bringing investments and also supporting indirectly with the creation of tax revenues to help the government come back from this pandemic period. And of course, helping to reduce electricity expenses for end consumers on a sustainable way. Well, before I finish and open for our questions and answers, because I believe this is where the real meat of the event today is, I want to invite you to participate on an event that Laura kindly already shared with you, which is Intersolar South America. So despite of the pandemic, we're expecting to host on November from the 16th to the 18th, our annual event. This is the largest solar event in South America, and it would be our pleasure to have you on board and participating on the event with us. There will be conference and exhibition for those who are interested in the Brazilian and South American solar market. Well, thank you again for your attention, and I'm looking forward to our debate and discussion here. Thank you.
Rodrigo, thank you so much. My God, it's, of course, I'm not in this industry, and we hear, I mean, I always, as a Brazilian, heard for many years that Brazil didn't take advantage of its solar technology or capabilities, but what you're showing here is that that is never correct. I mean, there are quite a bit of changes that happen in the last few years, and there's so much room for expansion, right? 38% you said now, or it's at this moment that you can still develop even more the solar potential. It's amazing. Wow, impressed. Very, very impressed.
Arnold, and important to notice as well, we have to be very very clear with one thing. Brazil took a long time to actually understand the potential of its solar resource and to use it. For example, I said that the market, the regulation from our agency, our regulatory agency, started in 2012, but the market really started to take off in 2016, 2017. So we're saying just less than 5 years ago, 3-4 years ago. It's really a fresh market with huge potential. Brazil is the largest electricity market in Latin America. It's important for our participants to understand that. And it has more than 220 million people who are potential consumers waiting for good products and good opportunities to take the advantage of this technology.
Yes, and I know that you founded the association in 2013, and you have seen, I guess, since 2013 to now, a huge interest by the number of companies you have as members. So you see huge potential in any sort of part of the solar business, not the completely, but and then I'm going to jump to Laura a little bit because we already have some questions for you, but there is a lot of foreign investment or foreign interest in this technology or to penetrate this market because there is a field for it.
Definitely. Well, first, it's important to say when we founded ABSOLAR initially, it was 9 of us as co-founders. We were a small association, right? 9 company members. Now we are more than 600. So the growth was exponential during this period. ABSOLAR now is one of the largest electricity associations in Brazil already. And we are talking about 1.6% of the electricity matrix. Imagine the change when we start to become really one of the leading sources in the country. So what we saw was that, and this is happening overall throughout the world, Arnon, we saw that the 20th century, it was the oil and gas century, we have to say, and also coal. And we have to be thankful and grateful for the support that these technologies brought. But now the 21st century is seen as a renewable century. So the technologies and the markets that will be developing and bringing more business opportunities are definitely in solar, in wind, in biomass, and in hydro.
Wow, fascinating, fascinating. I'm so thrilled to hear this. I mean, it's great. It changes my vision of what what I thought of this field in Brazil. And I have a couple of questions that I have to read for you. We send it over. So the first one, so I don't forget, because otherwise I'm getting notes here. Don't forget to ask Rodrigo. So the first question comes for Stephen Keys, and he says, what foreign expertise is of interest to Brazilian Brazilian actors in this sector, such as design, engineer, civil, project management, fabrication, etc. So what's your advice on this?
Thank you, Stephen, for the question. Well, first of all, there is a lot of interest from international companies in the Brazilian market. As Aaron was mentioning, yes, that's true. We see companies, and several of them are our members already, from, well, the Americas in general, especially United States and Canada, from Europe, and also from Asia. So they are already seeing Brazil as a big solar player or opportunity if they're not participating on the market yet. And we invite you to join us with that on this market. Well, regarding which segments, I'm definitely sure there are a lot of opportunities for companies who deal with services, especially all the part of project engineering, service support also for power plants that are being built, and after that operating and doing the maintenance of power plants that are already built, because we are in the initial phase here in Brazil. So there are still, currently we have in total, small scale plus large scale, that's 5.7 gigawatts of solar operational in Brazil, right? So it's not such a small number. This represents about 30 billion reais in investments already done in the country. I'll leave Laura to the conversion for the Canadian dollars, because I don't want to give you the wrong numbers, but she can probably help us with that. How many billions are these in Canadian dollars? But 30 billion reais already operational in Brazil. And Laura is muted.
Laura, you're muted. Just, sorry. There you go. There.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Around 10 billion Canadian dollars, I think, right?
Thank you, Laura. So that's not a small number, right? But we're just starting. So imagine what we can develop. Apart from services, goods, so bringing high quality equipment from other markets, but you have to take in consideration that Brazil is a very price sensitive market. So you need to develop a good proposition, and not only highlighting the technical qualities of your products, but also competing on price. And we know this is difficult on the solar sector because there is a lot of pressure from Asian players as well. So it's a tight negotiation process. And that's one of the reasons why I mentioned the opportunity for services, where I believe there is a lot of differentials on quality, on the tools that are used as well, and that are not so pressed by only the price as a market. Sorry.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you one more question, then I want to go back to Laura because I want her to comment on something. But I have another question here from Antonio Anselmo, and he says, with the exponential growth of solar energy in Brazil, what is ABSOLAR's assessment of the environmental impacts caused by the energy source? These impacts on the entire panel production chain and on the final disposal.
Thank you. That's also a great question. First, it's important to say that the solar sector has sustainability in its DNA. For those of you who might not know, 93% of a solar module is recyclable. So we are actually talking that solar, the comparison we do in the sector is that solar is almost as recyclable as aluminum can. So your preferred drink, You can, and Brazil is known for being a recycling country for aluminum. And well, solar modules are basically glass and aluminum. These are the highest quantities and weights, and the technology is quite recyclable. In Brazil, there is also a need because there is a public policy of final end of use destination of the components and of the goods that are sold. This is not only for solar, this is for the whole electric and electronic industry segment. We have been discussing very closely with the government, with the Ministry of Mines and Energy, and with the authorities on how to prepare when we have a lot of these components on the end of life, which is expected to happen in about 20 to 25 years, when these components are coming out of the power plants and are being recycled and recollected and recycled. And we're discussing now with the government how to structure the chain so that we can have this procedure happening in Brazil. And there is a lot of opportunity there as well. Some companies are already looking into recycling, but Brazil don't have established value chain for the recycling process already. So there is opportunity if your company work on that area as well.
And if you allow me, just to make a small contribution there, because Rodrigo mentioned the pricing, with that Brazil is very price sensitive, right? But I just wanted to mention, if Canadian companies have a solution for this segment and they want to explore opportunities in Brazil, we can try to find a good partner for them in Brazil. Perhaps they could even manufacture the solution here in Brazil, transfer technology, manufacture here, or even come and open an office, of course. But if they don't want to do that, we can try to find a good partner for them in the Brazilian market. And I'm sure Rodrigo can support us as well in finding partners.
Definitely. And also on the same line of what Laura mentioned, we have been following several European companies who are also known for high quality goods, but with also a little bit of a higher price on their equipments and components. And these companies have managed to establish themselves as suppliers of equipments and components in Brazil. So they find local partners, they either transfer technology or start manufacturing locally with their partners, or they streamline a way of bringing their components that are outsourced from other regions of the world to the country. And structure, normally this is done with the support also of capacity building, so they help to educate the market about the importance of quality, and we are for quality. We think that's very important. Solar equipments and goods, they are not all alike. You shouldn't buy only by price, you need to buy by quality and by performance and by also duration, right? Long life, term life of the components. And I think there are many opportunities for companies who want to help us to educate the market on these regards as well.
Amazing. I'm so glad Laura jumped in, because I was going to ask her as well. As we know, taxes in Brazil are high on importation of foreign products. Is there an incentive from the Brazilian government, Laura, that you can comment, and maybe Rodrigo as well? People get scared when they see the taxation in Brazil on product. Is this technology something that there is an incentive from the Brazilian government in lowering some taxes because of its the type of energy it will generate?
Rodrigo, would you like to comment?
I can do that, definitely.
Perhaps you have some news.
Aaron, I was taking a look at some of the questions here, because I saw that Antonio Harley mentioned Professor Ftenakis.
Correct.
Which I'm very fond of his work. So thank you, Antonio, for mentioning that, and it would be our pleasure to be in touch with the Columbia University regarding the work of Professor Ftenakis. Let's talk after that, please. Can you kindly just recap the question?
The question was about, as we know, taxes in Brazil on imported foreign products is very high, and people get very scared. And it goes into other questions in the chat as well about forming partnerships with local Brazilian companies to develop technology together. But also we know there are customs laws in Brazil that if a technology is not available in Brazil specifically, you can apply for a reduction of duty on importation. So my question to both of you, with your experience, have you seen a reduction on import taxes because of the type of technology that some foreign companies are trying to penetrate in Brazil?
All right. Well, I would first say that it's usual for us to say in events when we speak with international investors that Brazil is a complex market, a complex country, and a complex society. We even say Brazil is not for the faint-hearted, right? And that's because, in fact, there is a lot of bureaucracy, tax complexity, so you need partners to do business in Brazil. You need a local face, you need someone that speaks Portuguese and that can be your voice in Brazil, and that doing business in Brazil has a lot to do with person-to-person interaction, even digitally, right? So you need a face of your company, of your business. It's not only the logo, it's someone to relate to when people are doing business in Brazil. And you also need someone to help you throughout the mazes. And there are many labyrinths in Brazil about taxation, regulation, imports, how to deal with the government, and also where to find the good opportunities. So there are, in fact, some incentives, state-wise incentives, sometimes municipality incentives. We, for example, at ABSOLAR have been helping states and municipalities to create their own solar programs. And these solar programs have tax rebates or tax reductions. They allow people to get access to incentivized funding for solar projects. Sometimes the government is now doing solar business by contracting solar for their own use. For example, the state of Piauí is developing a public-private partnership, PPP, which has the objective of investing in 8 5-megawatt distributed generation solar power plants. That 40 megawatts, around 175 million reais that will be invested by the the state government of Piauí on solar projects to reduce the electricity expenses. So these are some of the examples. And regarding specific import taxes, there are also some companies who can go after tax exemptions for their equipments and components, provided that they can show that these equipments and components have no locally produced similar quality equipment or good. But there is a procedure for that, right? We at ABSOLAR don't do this directly, but companies can find partners who help with them how to get this access to this incentive.
Yeah. And just to complement, Arno, our recommendation here is usually, because we know about the complexities of taxes in Brazil, we usually advise the companies. We have a list here that we can provide of companies who deal with that on a daily basis, right? Companies who are experienced, like a custom broker or a company like MELLOHAWK, right, that can support them as they approach the Brazilian market, you know, because this can make a difference. Sometimes a simple description of the product can be difficult in the future to solve a problem. You know, you realize, oh, I shouldn't have described the solution like this. And it's a simple word sometimes that gives you a lot of work in the future to solve this problem. So our recommendation is to find an expert, someone we can provide, we can recommend at the consulate. And as Rodrigo said, there are exemptions. There are Canadian companies who have applied for exemptions in Brazil and have been able to get it. You need to have a differential. You need to be unique. The solution that you are providing needs to be unique, and you need to speak to the government to get the approval. Once you get the approval, this document allows the product to come into the Brazilian market with no import taxes, okay? Yes. In addition to what Rodrigo has mentioned.
Yeah, I forgot to mention the actual name. It's called Ex Tarifário.
Ex Tarifário.
So which which is a process that I'm very familiar with in Brazil, is not a simple process. And people come to us every time to do this analysis. As you know, Laura, we communicate with all your offices about Canadian companies trying to penetrate in Brazil. And we do this analysis, which is very important, something Rodrigo mentioned. When you have a partner that speaks the language and you speak to a customs broker partner in Brazil and you describe the product in a certain way, you might get ahead in a reduction of taxes and also on the ex-tarifario. But ex-tarifario is something available. It's not something very simple. People ask me about that every day. It is a process you can initiate, but there's no resolution very fast. You need to go several months in analysis and proof and everything else in order for you to obtain. So I don't want to give a false hope on ex-tarifario all the time, because it's something that has to be analyzed in a lot of detail. But it's something that your office, with the partners and the approved partners that both of you have and the knowledge they have, they can certainly help a Canadian company much faster than someone that has no expertise in this field. So that's what we're trying to showcase here, how much contact and how much knowledge and how many contacts you both have to actually speed up the process of this partnership. And there's other comments here as well from, I think I'm going to see Sila, there's an abbreviation. Would it be needed a local company as a partner in order to operate in Brazil as a company offering project execution services, commissioning, and O&M services? And I think you both answered that question already, but you can comment. Yes, a partnership in Brazil is crucial to people to get to know your product, to introduce your product. If the product breaks down and you need somebody to pick up the phone, right? You need a local person to complain to. We hear this all the time. Canadians are very, Brazilians are very scared that they don't have anybody to contact, right? So it's a partnership. Again, Laura, you can elaborate. It's very.
And the companies in Brazil, the utilities, if you're talking about a centralized type of generation for solar, for example, if you deal with the utilities, they are very large companies. Some of these utilities have 13 million clients. It's amazing, the numbers here in Brazil. And they are very well structured. They have international investment here. And they want to have a local contact. It's also a cultural characteristic here in Brazil. We like personal relationships. We say here that we make friends before we make business. We do business, right? And it's very true in the Brazilian market. They want to see you. They want you to knock on their doors. So this does require some level of investment, and investment not only of money, funds, but of resources also. You need to send your employees here to knock on their door. You go with them for dinner sometimes, and you go to the main events, and you are present here in Brazil. Then you will be able to sign a deal, and usually the deals they compensate because they are very sizable. They are very good deals, and the companies, the payments, they usually are very good companies. I have never heard a complaint here so far from Canadian companies. At least in the power sector, they are serious. The institutions, they do work. I have a lot of respect for all the main players here in Brazil. The regulator in Brazil, it's very technical. There's all the associations, they are very active as well. So there is a lot of dialogue with the companies. So I do believe it's a requirement for the company to have some local presence. Doesn't need to be an office that belongs to the company, but for you to find a good partner is important here for Brazil.
And Laura, on this, sorry, Rodrigo, go ahead.
Arnon, just another information that I think it's relevant when we think specifically about the electricity sector and the solar sector. Electricity projects, they need to be registered. So you need to have a representative here because of technical concerns and because of legal concerns as well. It's a little bit similar with the civil engineering sector, right? If you want to build a building, you need someone responsible for that building, because if there's a problem with the building or if someone is injured, you have someone to complain to or to ask about that project. So the same is true for an electricity power plant, small, medium, or large. You need an electric engineer who is responsible for this project, who will sign for this project, and therefore he needs to be legally aligned here in Brazil with the authorities, right? With the engineering authorities, so that he can sign for this project. So it's important to
be
have a local
liable,
partner.
right?
To be liable, thank you very much. So it's important to have a local partner for technical reasons and legal reasons as well.
Great. Amazing. Laura, I want to go back to you while you're talking about the partnership of Canadian companies. Can you briefly describe the type of investments that you have seen through your office of Canadian companies in Brazil? You send me some examples of projects that already are happening.
Well, one of the main players here in the renewable energy sector has been Brookfield. Brookfield has been in Brazil for over 100 years. It was one of the first electricity producers here in Brazil. This is in the late 1800s, and then Brookfield continued in Brazil, and nowadays they are investing considerable amounts in the renewable energy sector, solar, wind, hydro, and there is also a partnership between Canadian Solar and Votorantim, which is a big group here, Brazilian group. They signed a deal to explore opportunities in the renewable energy sector. And Canadian Solar has a production plant in Brazil, right? They are in the state of São Paulo. They have a production plant there in the city of Sorocaba. But they also they build and operate plants in Brazil, right? And so these are the ones that come to mind, but there are some others. CPPIB, the pension plan, they are investing in the Brazilian market. Casa de Pau, also another Ontario Teachers, they are investing as well in the renewable energy market. So I think it's a demonstration that companies see the return on investment, right? It's a long-term investment, which brings good results, and the institutions, despite the problems that we have seen on the news about the new government, I believe in the energy sector, people need energy, right? Nobody can.
I know.
It's a sector that really they put an effort to solve. Whenever we have crisis here, I feel it's not. They really make it a priority to work with the stakeholders here in Brazil.
I know we're a little bit over our time, but this is so interesting. I have a couple of more questions, and then I promise we'll end this. But I had another question on the chat about, is there a market for solar-powered lithium battery in domestic power generation in rural areas specifically? Do you guys have any knowledge about lithium solar batteries?
Yes. Well, first of all, maybe some of our listeners are not aware, but in the beginning of this year, the Ministry of Mines and Energy launched a new program which has the objective of bringing electricity to about 72,000 families that live in the Amazonas forest region. So these are 9 Brazilian states overall. It's a big area, and who currently does not have access to electricity. So we're talking about around 300,000 people. That's the scale of this project. And the main technology who will be leading this electrification effort is solar off-grid systems. So there will be opportunity not only for the solar modules, but also for the charge controllers, inverters, batteries, and electrical material, right? Also the projects and the installation of the systems there. So yeah, there is opportunity for batteries, not only on this market of off-grid systems, But also Brazil still starting to develop regulation for promoting energy storage behind the meter for clients that are connected to the grid, so in homes, in businesses, in public buildings, and also in front of the meter. These are large-scale battery projects, such as the ones we see, for example, in Australia, in the United States, in Japan, in Germany, and so on and so forth. But these are still projects under development, normally research and development projects, as Laura explained, with financing from the distribution companies. So there is money for that already available. And additionally, at ABSOLAR, we took a strategic decision to help develop the energy storage market. So we created a specific work group on energy storage, and we are discussing regulation, legislation, taxation, and financing to kickstart the energy storage market in the country. So if you're into energy storage, join us on this effort. There's also information about our members that are doing energy storage business in our website. You can find this and filter the members by technology use.
And just for you to know, I'm not allowed to mention the name, but there is a Canadian company from Ontario who is already doing business in Brazil in the lithium battery segment for energy storage. They have signed a deal with a Brazilian power utility, a large power utility. They are using R&D money. As I said, it's mandatory in Brazil. They are using this to test their batteries. It's a pole-mounted solution here that they are testing. And if the project goes well, the intention is to have a more widespread solution within the utilities. So I believe the utilities, they are looking very seriously into that. And also I want to mention that the utilities in Brazil, they are creating services companies to install solar energy, for example, in people's houses or in commercial buildings. The utilities are doing that as well. And they are buying a lot of storage. They said they have the intention to buy the lithium batteries to complement the solution there.
Wow, my God, so much potential. That's amazing. I have oh my God, there's lots of comments on the chat. How wonderful this has been in your knowledge. I'm gonna ask one last question here from Isadora, and what are, to both of you, what are the biggest challenges in the sector what are the biggest challenges the sector has faced in terms of deploying solar energy? Are there specialized labor, finance? So can you comment on the biggest challenges of deploying this type of business in Brazil?
Well, one of the challenges is the fact that the market is growing quite exponentially, as we mentioned. And because of that, there is, in fact, lack of qualified people to participate, to develop the projects, to install the systems. So it's also interesting if you have, for example, interest in supporting and creating more educational programs for these professionals, or if you want to bring your teams to help bring projects online in Brazil, right? Additionally, another difficulty that we have is access to capital. Capital is expensive in Brazil, and we know that many international investors find Brazil as a very attractive and interesting market. Currently, in fact, it's cheap, right? Because the Brazilian exchange ratio is in favor of international capital. So it's a good moment to consider joining the Brazilian market if you're an investor and you want to find projects with reasonable or interesting prices to structure your portfolio. Another area is technology. So if you have technology or innovation that you want to bring to Brazil, research and development projects that have become end consumer products, or services or strategies, business models that you want to apply and test in Brazil, this is also an opportunity. So I find several different areas where companies can, when there are bottlenecks, I have to say, and we can transform these bottlenecks into interesting opportunities.
And something I want to complement also is a challenge that we have in regards to attracting Canadian companies to the market, because Canadian companies, they have a very good solutions, high quality solutions, technologies, but they are sometimes very concerned about the Brazilian market. They are afraid. I know that Brazil is very complex. It has a lot of bureaucracy, but also a lot of opportunity. Brazil is a country of contrasts, right? You see a lot about the poverty in Brazil. You hear the news about how difficult the situation, but Brazil also has these huge companies, very sophisticated, with a lot of investments, a lot of growth, very capable professionals also in Brazil. So it's a country, there are two sides to Brazil. If you go to a city like São Paulo, you would be impressed to see the sophistication, the level of the buildings and everything. So, and the institutions, they do work here in Brazil, right? I think the country has a lot to offer for those who take the risk, right? I think the returns can be high for these companies. So if the company is willing to put an investment, I think it can collect a lot of good results.
Correct. And communication, Laura, is paramount. Always to communicate, always to look for answers and analyze and talk. Otherwise you have to make the right decision, right, all the time.
And also, please use us here. We are the Consulate General of Canada, and sometimes the company comes, they are not very known here in Brazil, and they go directly to the company and they knock on the doors, but nobody knows them. Use us, use the name of the consulate. Sometimes we call the company and they do answer because it's the government. So it's a free service. So I advise the companies to use that.
And that's the reason we're doing these webinars. We need to showcase how much knowledge your offices have, together with your partners like Rodrigo, to bring this knowledge to Canadian companies. I mean, it's so important. Okay, I have another question. I have to ask this question because it's just, they're gonna kill me. Are there opportunities to run a pilot project in one of those remote communities for a remote solar power unit being able to support several homes in a grid solar plant? Have you had any inquiries about this?
Well, in Brazil, we have several different ways to bring electricity to remote or isolated areas using solar. And a microgrid or mini grid is one of these options, yes. Usually, these are part of two different programs. One is the program that I mentioned that was announced this year by the Ministry of Mines and Energy, which is called Programa Mais Luz para a Amazônia. It's more light to the Amazon program. That's the name of the program if we translate it directly. I'm not sure there is an official translation, but you can check this information. It's available. And additionally, apart from this program, we have an ongoing long-term program in Brazil focused on electrification, which is called Programa Luz para Todos, is Light for All program, right? And this is the official electrification program in Brazil. It's not only focused in Amazonia, it's applied in every and each state of the country to bring electricity to people who are not connected to the grid and where the grid may never arrive because it's just not economically feasible to bring the grid there. It makes much more sense to have a solar system or even in some cases, which we believe will in the future not be a frequent option anymore, a diesel generator, for example. There are still some places that use these diesel generators. So there are opportunities also related to research and development, and state utilities, they have research and development programs, and sometimes they bring forward these public calls for projects, regarding specific solutions they need to provide. So you have to follow the opportunities. This is something, for example, that ABSOLAR does to each and every of our associate members. We follow all public opportunities, public callings from federal government, state government, and municipalities regarding new auctions, small-scale projects, schools that want to put solar into their rooftops, and so on and so forth. So you can find a lot of different opportunities on our internal business opportunity channel. It's how we call it. And yeah, I mean, we would be glad to help you with that.
Amazing, amazing. Anyway, I am sorry we went over our time, but there's so much to cover. I'm so honored and thankful for both of you spending your time with us today and shining some light on this amazing technology that I'm so happy is spreading all over Brazil. So I want to thank Laura Neto, Trade Commissioner for the Canadian government based in Rio de Janeiro. Thank you so much, Laura, for being here. And thank you, Dr. Rodrigo Sauaia, for the founder and chief executive for ABSOLAR, for being here. I also want to say that we'll be sharing this presentation with everyone. So the contact details for Rodrigo and Laura will be in the PowerPoints that we're going to be sending. And I welcome you again to join us another time to bring some news about solar energy and energy in general in Brazil again. So thank you so much. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Arnold. Thank you, Laura. Pleasure.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you, Arnold.
You're welcome. And thank you, everyone, for watching all over the world. We're thrilled that you're here. Keep looking at our invitations. In 2 weeks, we have another webinar series with the commissioner, the Trade Commissioner Office in Brazil. So join us for that. And I hope you can do a lot of business with Rodrigo and Laura in Brazil. So thank you so much, and I'll see you again. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.